is a new horror thriller movie coming to us from writer and director M. Night Shyamalan. This is not an original from M. Night Shyamalan, though. This is actually very inspired by a graphic novel called Sandcastle, but I feel like it's been reported that it's kind of loosely inspired by it, like it has kind of similar story beats, but M. Night did a lot of his own stuff. Either way, I haven't read it, so it's not like I could really offer like a comparison in a review, so if you're a fan of the graphic novel, I guess it doesn't really matter. I'm sorry. And this movie is about a group of people who go to a resort. They get hooked up with a private little beach that they can go to just because the manager likes them or whatever, and they get there and they slowly kind of realize that they are aging quite quickly. And they're like, oh no, how do we get out of this? It doesn't seem like there's a way out. Tensions are starting to grow heated just because of the kind of people they are, the kind of things that are starting to shine through with their characters as they get older and more paranoia starts to grow. And we have a movie. I will always be interested in a new M. Night Shyamalan movie just because as far as like auteurs go, or like directors whose names you've definitely heard of who have a specific style, like, you know, Nolan, Scorsese, Spielberg, all these guys, M. Night Shyamalan is somebody who you know, but he's got such a wide-ranging response to him. You can ask like a group of like 10 people, and each of them will have like different opinions about what's his best movies, which ones are the worst ones, when did he start to slip up. And even though some people consider The Visit onwards kind of a resurgence after the past couple movies leading up to that, some people would say, actually, I don't really care for The Visit. Or maybe they enjoy Split, but they didn't really like Glass too much, you know? Even going back to like his first couple movies, not including Praying with Anger or Wide Awake, because people legitimately don't know that those are movies he made. They just think The Sixth Sense was his directorial debut, which is kind of funny. But even then, some people can't even agree like what his best early couple movies is. I think the only thing people agree on is that The Sixth Sense is incredible. When talking about Unbreakable, you might find somebody who's like, yeah, it was pretty good up until the ending. I'm not a big fan of the ending. I can't believe that because I love Unbreakable just about as much as The Sixth Sense, but I have seen some people say like, yeah, that ending was a little fucked. Or some people saying Signs was where it started to slip up and, you know, the writing for the aliens was dumb. But there's some people that think Signs is incredible. And it's like, you can't really decide on anything. There's no like majority opinion, which is kind of exciting, but also kind of frustrating too. I think exciting because you never really know what kind of movie you're gonna get, what the response will be, but also kind of frustrating because there are people that will just legitimately kind of write off any goodwill M. Night has ever had, and just go into a movie like this thinking, oh man, I can't wait to laugh because it looks so bad. And that's not really been me as far as like coming to M. Night Shyamalan movies. Like I've never wanted to just jump on the pre-hate bandwagon and just be like, oh, it's M. Night, can't wait to see what kind of crazy shit he does that's really stupid. Like I'm not for doing that because I don't really like Lady in the Water through After Earth, those 4 movies in that time period. That's where I'm kind of like, those are the duds for me. But the other 7 movies that he has made around that, I think are pretty good. They vary from excellent to pretty fun, and that's good enough for me. So going into this movie, I knew that the response was kind of already mixed. Some people saying it's some of his best work since his earlier films, and some people saying it was a laugh riot, so bad it's funny movie. So I legitimately didn't know what I was gonna get, but I was excited to see it nonetheless because M. Night gets me excited for anything he does. I'm always interested to see what he's up to. Which makes it all the more disappointing that I found this so lacking in every single way. You can feel that it's an M. Night movie, but also it doesn't feel like an M. Night movie. It feels like someone maybe trying to do an M. Night movie. It's kind of complicated, but overall I was really frustrated with the experience of this. And I think the main thing that I was frustrated by was ultimately the character work. I think a lot of M. Night Shyamalan's best movies are when they focus really heavily on the character work. And I think he's got a really good understanding of like what makes a good dramatic character, what can make a really good dramatic performance, and what can really drive at the heartstrings of people. Even though you're coming to some of these movies to see like a haunting movie or a superhero movie or an alien invasion movie, some of the things that stick out are just the more personal drama moments. And this movie has parts where they put in some backstory through expository dialogue, but it's not like, I didn't really feel like I was getting to know any of the characters as it went on. They all just kind of came across as props for the plot for me, which ultimately, yeah, every character is a prop for the plot, you know, but you usually, the best kind of written characters are well written where you get attached to them. You get attached to these fictional people and you believe the performances and you believe everything going on. But with these characters, I was having a hard time really getting invested with any of their personal drama. It's there, the good drama is there, but every time they bring it up, it just feels like, well, we got to move on to the next thing now. So, we don't really have a lot of time to focus on that. This is one of those movies also where it doesn't feel like it has like a good flow of events. It doesn't have like a good pace. Instead of, you're watching something happen, and because that happens, it leads into this perfectly. And then it spreads into this scene, and it just keeps growing and growing, and you understand how everything connects. This is one of those movies where M. Night kind of writes it as, now this is happening. Okay, now this is happening. And now you're dropped off here. It feels like you're just kind of being shown and dropped off places like, okay, now this is happening because this would be a cool thing to see. And it's like, sure, there's definitely elements of this movie, and I'm not sure which of it is borrowed from the graphic novel, which one of it is M. Night's own kind of vision of this movie. But there are ideas sprinkled in that are like really clever to utilize the plot of this, beach that makes you older. There's several ideas that are thrown in that are interesting to think about. There's certain like very suspenseful sequences that they craft that are legitimately very well made. M. Night definitely still has some really strong filmmaking moments in this movie. That's why I don't like to write off M. Night as soon as like a trailer of his new movie drops. Because even looking back to Glass and Split, a lot of his striking cinematography, a lot of really great stuff filmmaking wise is in those movies. So there's definitely really strong parts to the filmmaking. There's certain ways he edits that makes you kind of go like, oh, this is happening to them. Oh, that's a really great way to visually convey that in the movie. They do some really great visual effects moments. There's one sequence in particular where, it involves visual effects, and I was like, holy shit, this is fucking nuts. Like I'm glad it hasn't been like shown in marketing or anything, because it's honestly like one of the most standout things in this entire movie as far as like horror goes. Even like the casting for the kids as they get older, like that's really spot on. I was really impressed with how they were able to match up these older actors with the kids that you initially start with. And even some of the practical makeup as it first gets introduced, like it looks really good for these actors that are already kind of like, their parents like middle-aged, and giving them wrinkles and making them look older as it goes on. So there's a lot of good stuff worked in, technically speaking, from a filmmaking perspective. And even the cast, some members of the cast do a really great job. Like Rufus Sewell in this movie is like the one who is like the most consistent with his line delivery. It seemed like he had exactly what he needed to do in mind the entire time. He was good. He was really good. Alex Wolff, he's kind of like an older version of a 6-year-old, and he acts that way because he still is that mentally. And I thought he captured that incredibly well. Abby Lee is a fun addition to this, considering what her character is. Vicky Krieps, Thomasin McKenzie, you have good cast members in here doing good work. But then you have to work with the dialogue, and that's another issue I had with this movie, is that, look, M. Night has a specific way he directs his actors and also writes them, and I'm totally fine with anyone pursuing their vision to a T. But when it starts to become a detriment to your project with your overall thing, then, it's open to criticism, I feel like. I think it's always open to critique, especially if you as the viewer feel like it's getting in the way of a better movie. When the movie first starts off, it's just like a young boy. He talks this way because he's a really weird young boy, and it's like, okay, I get it. But then once you start applying this dialogue, this structuring to every other character who's not this weird young boy, they should be, for all intents and purposes, completely opposite, but they have similar lines and they deliver them in similar ways. It's like, it's not working for me. It all kind of comes across very clunky and awkward. There's one character who introduces himself through dialogue at like the worst time. Like the worst thing is happening, and for some reason M. Night decided to give him lines that don't work in the context of the scene. So it's like, I don't understand what the thought process was here. There's so many on the nose time related like puns earlier on in the movie that, if you didn't know this movie was about aging, you might be able to catch on to it. It's already a crime enough that when you start off the movie, they really gloss through any actual interesting character development or introduction for the drama, but then you couple it with just this clunky dialogue and just this really poor way of directing the actors to say it. It's like you're not doing your movie any favors. And I know this was filmed during the pandemic. This is a movie that was shot and completed during the pandemic. You had a limited cast to work with, so that's good. M. Night managed to make a movie during the pandemic. That's really cool that he gave some people jobs during that really stressful time. So I'm not sure if that was a hindrance on some of the production of this movie, but it just feels like there were weird creative choices made by him that usually work out better. Some of his dialogue works in context with the movies that you're watching. If you take it out of context, it's like, okay, yeah, that's a little weird, but put it in context with the movie, it's like, okay, it works, and that's just how I should view this dialogue. But that's not the case with this movie. Everything sounds weird and feels like it's coming out of an alien instead of a human being. But the creative choices don't end with just like the directing of the actors or the dialogue itself. It also spreads into the actual like cinematography of this movie. Now, as I said, there's moments where he as a filmmaker really shines in this. A lot of his filmmaking is really strong in this movie, but then there's a lot of moments where he just does like weird zooms, like he's following someone, he does like an awkward kind of digital zoom and the camera's still moving. There's one part where everyone's standing in a circle and the camera is, going around and around. And usually with shots like that, I don't particularly mind. It's kind of like a whatever thing for me. But watching it for this movie, I kind of had to like squint my eyes a bit looking at it on the big screen. I was kind of like, oh God, like I was actually kind of feeling like put off by the shot selection. There's a moment where, characters' heads are like in corners of the frame and the shot is moving up towards the sky and their heads are starting to slowly get cut off as well. It's like we're focusing on nothing, and the purpose of this shot was to specifically cover up something that would have given this an R probably. So I was really baffled by a lot of the creative choices. And also, as I said, this is a movie where certain events feel like they just kind of happen. And it also gives you this feeling that a lot of the more interesting plot developments they could have really focused on and really created something really fascinating, because this is a concept that leads itself to fascinating ideas in storytelling. It feels like a lot of it is just kind of like, well, no, we're not going to focus on that. We're just going to jump into it. There's something that happens that opens up a huge can of worms as far as like, what the fuck is this? You know what I mean? And I'm trying not to spoil it because it genuinely kind of took me by surprise when I saw the movie. But the way they deal with it, it's all dealt with a 2-minute tracking shot. And once again, to M. Night's credit, it's a good tracking shot. It captures a lot of stuff that happens in 2 minutes, a lot of dialogue being delivered, moving around the speech, a lot of stuff happening. But then once that tracking shot ends, that interesting idea that they just introduced goes away immediately. And it's never brought up again. And they didn't even do a good job of leading into it as well. It's just something that they're like, well, this would happen, and maybe it would, but I'd like to see the development of it. I want to see characters like growing relationships. I want to see characters actually interacting and leading to this. There's a character who is just kind of schizophrenic because they decide, let's have him be schizophrenic. And there's a part of it that you can relate to like some social commentary if they really wanted to, but they leave it so vague that it barely kind of makes an impact. It doesn't really feel like they're trying to say anything. And also there's this character who is a rapper. I believe his name was Mid-Size Sedan, something like that. And he's been on this beach. They show it like he's there earlier before anyone else, but he's still there later when these other characters come. And they're just kind of like, well, he's just been sitting here for a while. But it doesn't look like he's aged at all, despite the fact that that's what's supposed to happen. How is that a thing that's been happening? But it also seems like they're trying to, put in some kind of maybe dynamic between him and another character in this, where I was like, that would be interesting. That would be interesting if they tried to pursue something like that, and then they just forget about it altogether. It's like, what are we trying to do here? Even as the movie goes on, I don't think they fully lived up to the title of the characters getting old. Like, you see wrinkles being put on characters' faces, and you see characters suffering from certain mental inflictions, but as far as like them getting old, it's not like you're watching I'm Thinking of Ending Things with what they did with like Toni Collette and David Thewlis, where they expertly turn them into old people, and you were totally convinced, that you were watching older versions of these people. It's not that at all. It's just like once again, I'm trying not to spoil it, but it comes to a point where they get so old that something has to happen to some of these characters when they get to that age. But when it does happen, you're kind of like, you still look like a middle-aged man just with some more wrinkles, So I don't think they even lived up to that full potential there. And of course, because it's an M. Night Shyamalan movie, it all builds up to an ending that's supposed to be kind of a twist. But it's not as well hidden a twist as some of his other movies, because it was weird, because throughout this movie, I was kind of like, okay, so that's there to set up the twist. That's going to play a part in this ending. It's weird that they didn't hide it well, or even seem like they were making an attempt to hide it as well as they usually do in other M. Night Shyamalan movies. But even then, once the twist was kind of revealing itself, even though I did kind of predict, like, okay, something must be going on with this, it still kind of works. Like, when you hear it out, you're kind of like, okay, that's also an interesting thing to introduce. That's an interesting moral can of worms you're opening there. That's, once again, M. Night having certain ideas that are interesting to see in a movie and you want to see more of, see it played out better. But then there's aspects of that ending that I can't spoil, once again, but I just feel like it made it all kind of fall flat for me. Like, it kind of ends on a certain emotion that I wasn't really feeling. I was feeling like I wish they were focusing more on this, but it feels like it's not affecting them. Like, I don't know. And also, I couldn't help but notice, but structurally it felt very similar to Glass. Obviously, not the same events, but like the structure of how they were going about it, I was like, this feels very Glass. So that also leads to a predictable part of it, because I bet this is going to happen in a couple minutes, and you know, it happened. So I was very frustrated watching this movie, because it does legitimately have some good crafted sequences, some good filmmaking from Night, you know, and some of the actors are doing good jobs. It's just I wish I cared about the characters more. Usually I walk out of some of the best M. Night movies, you know, really digging the characters and walking out feeling like I had just watched actual human beings, at least, despite some clunky dialogue maybe in some of his later movies. And, you know, some ways he directs some of his actors, you still kind of feel like the beating heart of drama is still in some of his best movies, and it makes for better work. And for this, they tried to put in aspects of drama, but didn't fully flesh it out, and didn't really aim for any kind of theme, you know? Obviously, this is a movie that could lend itself to a really emotional or kind of deep theme, something like that, but they didn't really pursue it. I felt like it just felt like we have ideas for some creepy stuff, and you know, they executed some creepy stuff well, but then there's other stuff they don't really execute very well, a lot of it having to do with dialogue scenes. Jesus Christ, I honestly, it's kind of a cliche to pick on M. Night for his dialogue, but this is like some of the worst it's ever been, and this isn't even his worst movie. I'm gonna give Old a C-. I didn't walk out of it thinking it was funny bad, but I can definitely see why some people might look at it as such. There were definitely moments where I was kind of cringing, like, this is definitely like really awkward. And I also didn't walk out of it saying like this is one of M. Night's best movies. I definitely don't think that, but in parts, I can see why some people would really be taken by a lot of the work M. Night is putting into it. So once again, we have an M. Night movie that's reactions are all across the board, and it's kind of hard to pinpoint like what a majority opinion is, because there isn't. It's kind of exciting. You never know what you're gonna get. But I just wish that I kind of walked out of it with a stronger movie. But for those who did enjoy it, happy for you. I'm still excited to see M. Night's next movie. I think he said it's based on a book and he's still writing the script, so I'll be interested to see what he does, but you know, definitely going in with like fingers tightly crossed, especially after this. But if you've seen Old, leave in the comments below what you thought of it, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.